Good day to you. This is Alan from Alabama. Uh, was reading through Genesis 5 recently. It's this genealogy that some of you may know, and just to share a part of it, it says that when Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his likeness and named him Seth. And it says more about that. And then Seth lived 105 years and he fathered Enoch, and Enoch lived 90 and he fathered Kenan, and Kenan lived 70 years and he fathered Mahalalel. But notice what it says dropping down to verse 21. It says, when Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. And then in verse 22, it says, Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Did you catch the difference? Enoch not only lived, but he walked with God. In fact, Enoch's the only one in this list that's set up. We don't even discover somebody walking with God until several hundred years later when we read about that with Noah. And so it made me wonder, what is it that made Enoch different? In fact, so different that in verse 24 it says that he walked with God and that he was not, for God took him. Kind of an ancient Old Testament example of a New Testament concept called the rapture. But walking with God, I really started to wonder, what does this look like? You know, in Genesis 3, we read about how God comes in the cool of the day to the garden where Adam and Eve are. And apparently before this moment, where they're hiding behind the bushes because they've disobeyed him, they've gotten used to God coming to walk with them in the cool of the day. Well, again, I ask, what is it that here, hundreds of years later, that sets Enoch apart? And I believe we discover that in Hebrews 11, at least the beginning of that discovery. Because there it says, by faith Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found, because God had taken him. Now, before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And without faith, it's impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So faith is an important part of this, unquestionably. I would say it's a critical first step. But is that all of it? So I think a lot of times that's where we stop. Well, I've got faith in God. Well, I think it's reasonable to think that those that we read about in the genealogy, Adam and others, who it says that they lived, that they too believed in God. Many of them, I believe, worshiped God, as many of us do. So how is it that Enoch walking with God was different than just having lived with having faith in him? I think that answer in part comes in Leviticus 26. There we see that God makes this incredible promise to the Israelites. And he tells them, if you walk in my statutes and observe my commandments and do them, that all these things will happen. And he goes forth and he promises them that he is going to give them peace. He's going to give them protection from their enemies. He's going to give them provision and prosperity, you could argue. And he promises all of that, but he makes even a bigger promise. He promises his presence because he says, I will walk among you and will be your God, and you shall be my people. I would say that's the biggest promise that comes. Jesus has a similar example of this in the New Testament, John 14. He tells his disciples that if you love me, then keep my commandments. And he says, I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever. Don't miss the connection in both the Old Testament and in the New. How our obedience to the commands of God is tied to the presence of God. I think so oftentimes we miss that. And it's critical that we have not just faith, that gets us in the door, but that faith is followed up by our obedience in doing the things that God has called us to. There's this great account in Exodus 33 where Moses is out in the wilderness with the Israelites. He set up this tent of meeting, and it says that he would leave his tent and he would go to that tent of meeting. In fact, all the Israelites would stand outside of their tent and watch him as he would go out into this tent. And it says there in verse 11 of chapter 33, it says that Yahweh used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. And then a couple of verses later, Moses says, now therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, he tells Yahweh, please show me now your ways, that I may know you in order to find favor in your sight. See, Moses gets it. He gets that he needs to know the ways of God better in order to better experience the person and the presence of God in his life. And he says, consider too that this nation is your people. He's talking about all that have come out in the wilderness with him. And Moses said, God actually says, he says, my presence will go with you and I will give you rest. And Moses said to him, if your presence will not go with us, do not bring us up from here. For how should it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Great question. Is it not in your going with us so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? See, what sets us apart as God's people, both then and now, is the presence of God in our life. And the presence of God is brought near by our willingness to walk in his ways. And the only way we're going to walk in our ways is if we learn about who he is and how he's called us to walk. I pray that that's you today. I pray that if you've not yet experienced his presence the way you would like to, that you would do just as Moses did and say to God, reveal me your ways so that I can better know your person.